everything. Most people believe change requires massive effort, dramatic breakthroughs, or a complete reinvention of who they are. But the truth is quieter and far more powerful: everything. Real transformation is built in moments so small they're easy to ignore. A single decision repeated, a tiny discipline honored when no one is watching. Everything. A standard you keep even on ordinary days. This audiobook is about how small disciplines practiced daily reshape your identity, your confidence, and ultimately your life without burnout. Everything. Pressure or perfection. Because when discipline becomes small enough to repeat, it becomes strong enough to change everything. For a long time, we've been sold a very specific story about change. It's the story of the breakthrough moment, the overnight success, everything, the sudden wave of motivation that arrives out of nowhere and fixes everything at once. We see it in movies, in interviews, in viral posts. Someone wakes up one morning, everything decides, enough is enough, and from that moment forward, their life is completely different, disciplined, focused, successful, and without realizing it, everything. We start waiting for that moment to happen to us. We wait for the perfect Monday, the perfect burst of motivation, the moment when we finally feel ready, confident, and unstoppable, everything. But for most people, that moment never comes. And not because they're weak, lazy, or incapable. It's because that story isn't true. Everything. The idea of overnight transformation is one of the most damaging myths in personal growth. Not because it's dramatic, but because it quietly convinces good, capable people that something is wrong with them when change doesn't happen instantly. It creates pressure. It creates comparison. Everything. And it turns growth into something that feels heavy instead of empowering. Think about how many times you've started something with intensity. A new routine. A new goal. Everything. A new version of yourself. You went all in. You promised yourself that this time would be different. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, it was. You felt motivated, energized, proud. Everything. And then life happened. You got tired. You missed a day, then another. And suddenly that initial excitement faded, replaced by frustration and self-criticism. Everything. I always do this. Why can't I stay consistent? Maybe I'm just not disciplined. What if the problem was never you? Everything. What if the problem was the expectation that change has to be dramatic to be real? Real change almost never announces itself loudly. It doesn't show up with fireworks or a soundtrack. Everything. Most of the time. It begins quietly, in moments that don't feel important at all. A small decision to do something slightly better than yesterday. Everything. A choice to keep going even when the excitement is gone. A behavior so manageable that it feels almost too easy to count. This is where relief begins. Everything. Because once you let go of the myth of overnight transformation, you're no longer trying to become a completely different person in one day. Everything. You're simply becoming a slightly more disciplined version of yourself today. And that changes everything. Look at how real progress actually happens in everyday life. Everything. A person doesn't become confident because they wake up confident one morning. They become confident because they keep showing up to conversations, tasks, everything, and challenges even when they feel awkward or unsure. An athlete doesn't become strong because of one intense workout. They become strong because they train consistently. Everything. Even on days when the workout feels ordinary. Even the most successful people you admire didn't transform overnight. What you're seeing is the highlight reel. Everything, the result of hundreds or thousands of small, unglamorous actions repeated over time. But our minds don't like slow stories. We crave quick results. We want proof immediately. Everything. And when we don't see it, we assume nothing is happening. That's another illusion. Small actions don't feel powerful in the moment, but they are powerful because they're repeatable. Everything. And repeatable actions are what shape identity. Here's something most people never realize: your life doesn't change when your motivation spikes. Everything. It changes when your behavior becomes consistent. And consistency doesn't require intensity. It requires simplicity. Think about the pressure we put on ourselves. Everything. We tell ourselves we need to overhaul our entire routine. Wake up at 5 a.m., meditate, exercise, journal, read, work harder, eat perfectly, think positively, all starting tomorrow. Everything. And when we inevitably fail to maintain that level, we conclude that discipline just isn't for us. But discipline was never meant to be loud or extreme. True discipline is quiet. It's modest. Everything. It's the ability to keep a promise that's small enough to keep. Imagine someone who decides they'll walk for 5 minutes every day. 5 minutes doesn't feel life-changing. Everything. It doesn't feel impressive. But 5 minutes today leads to 5 minutes tomorrow. Tomorrow leads to 10. 10 leads to a habit. And a habit leads to a new self-image. Everything. I'm someone who takes care of my body. That identity shift is where transformation really lives. The myth of overnight change teaches us to chase results. Everything. Small disciplines teach us to build trust with ourselves. And trust is far more powerful than motivation. When you trust yourself, you don't panic after a bad day. Everything. You don't spiral after a setback. You don't quit just because progress is slow. You understand that missing once doesn't erase consistency. You understand that growth isn't linear. Everything. And it was never supposed to be. There's a calm confidence that comes from knowing you don't need to do everything at once. You just need to do something, and then do it again. Everything. This is especially important in a world that constantly pushes urgency. Faster, bigger, more. Everywhere you look, there's pressure to optimize, maximize, and accelerate. Everything. But pressure is not the same as progress. In fact, pressure often creates resistance. Small disciplines remove that resistance. They lower the barrier to action. They tell your mind, everything. This is safe. This is manageable. You can handle this. And once the mind feels safe, it stops fighting you. This is why people who succeed long-term don't rely on motivation. Everything. Motivation is emotional. It rises and falls. They rely on systems that are easy enough to maintain even on low-energy days. And here's the part that brings real relief. Everything. You don't need to feel ready to start. You don't need clarity about the entire future. You don't need confidence before action. Everything. You only need a discipline small enough that your brain doesn't argue with it. 1 page instead of a chapter, 1 push-up instead of a workout, 5 focused minutes instead of an hour. Everything. These actions may feel insignificant, but they are not. They are votes for the person you are becoming. Every time you show up for a small discipline, you send yourself a message. Everything. I keep my word. That message, repeated daily, reshapes how you see yourself. And once your self-image changes, your behavior follows naturally. This is why massive effort often fails. Everything. It asks you to become someone you don't yet believe you are. Small disciplines gently guide you there instead. You don't need to force transformation. You need to allow it. Everything. And allowing it means letting go of the fantasy that everything has to change immediately. It means accepting that growth is gradual, uneven, and often invisible at first. Everything. But it is happening. Even when it doesn't feel like it. Even when no one else sees it. Even when you're tempted to quit because the progress feels too slow. That quiet repetition. Everything. Those small disciplines honored daily are laying a foundation beneath you. Stronger than motivation. Stronger than excitement. Stronger than willpower. And once that foundation is in place, everything. Change doesn't need to be dramatic anymore. It becomes natural, automatic, almost inevitable. Not because you transformed overnight, but because you stopped expecting yourself to. Everything. Most people underestimate small actions because they don't feel powerful. They don't create a rush. They don't impress anyone. They don't look like progress from the outside. And yet, everything. These small disciplines are exactly what the human brain is built to respond to. Your brain is not designed for intensity. It is designed for repetition. Think about how you learned to walk. Everything. No one gave you a motivational speech. No one demanded perfection. You fell, stood up, stumbled again, and repeated the same tiny movements until one day, walking became automatic. Everything. That process didn't rely on force. It relied on consistency. The brain observed repetition and said, "This matters. Let's keep it." That same mechanism is working in your life right now. Everything. Whether you realize it or not. Every habit you have, good or bad, was built through small, repeated actions. You didn't become the person you are today in a single dramatic moment. Everything. You became this person quietly through patterns repeated over time. And that's exactly why small disciplines are so powerful. They speak the brain's native language. Everything. When people try to change their lives, they often go big. They overhaul everything at once. New routines, new goals, new rules, new pressure. For a few days, sometimes a few weeks, everything intensity carries them forward. But intensity is expensive. It drains energy, it demands willpower. And willpower, unlike habits, runs out. Everything. Small disciplines don't ask your brain to fight itself. They work with it. A small discipline feels safe. It doesn't trigger resistance. It doesn't threaten your identity. Everything. Your brain doesn't panic when you say, "I'll read 1 page," instead of, "I'll read for an hour every day." 1 page feels doable, non-threatening. Almost too easy to fail. Everything. And that's the point. Because when you repeat something small, your brain begins to associate it with certainty. And certainty builds trust. Trust turns into momentum. Everything. Consider someone who wants to get fit, but feels overwhelmed by gyms, workouts, and strict plans. They decide their only discipline is to put on their workout shoes every morning. Everything. Not to exercise, not to sweat, just to put the shoes on. That might sound pointless, but something interesting happens. Most days, once the shoes are on, the body moves. Everything. And even on days it doesn't, the identity is reinforced. I am someone who shows up. That identity shift is where real power lies. The brain doesn't change through information. Everything. It changes through evidence. Every small discipline is a piece of evidence you give yourself. Evidence that you can follow through. Evidence that you keep promises. Everything. Evidence that progress is happening, even if it's invisible. And that evidence compounds. Compounding is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for applause. But over time, everything. It becomes undeniable. Just like money invested slowly grows without drama, small disciplines multiply beneath the surface. Missing one workout doesn't ruin your health. Everything. Missing one day of effort doesn't erase progress. But repeating small effort daily builds something far stronger than motivation: reliability. Think of someone you trust deeply. Everything. You trust them not because they made one big promise once, but because they showed up consistently over time. Your brain works the same way with yourself. Everything. The more often you show up in small ways, the more you begin to trust yourself. And self-trust is a form of quiet confidence that changes everything. Everything. This is why small disciplines reshape behavior without force. They don't rely on emotion. They don't require perfect conditions. They survive bad days, low energy, and doubt. Everything. On days when motivation is gone, intensity collapses. But small disciplines remain intact. You don't need to feel inspired to drink a glass of water. Everything. You don't need confidence to write one sentence. You don't need courage to take one step. And yet those steps stack. A person who writes one sentence a day becomes a writer. Everything. A person who saves a small amount consistently becomes financially aware. A person who pauses before reacting becomes emotionally stronger. None of these changes happen loudly. Everything. But they happen reliably. What's powerful here is control. When goals feel massive, people feel powerless. When change feels overwhelming, people freeze. Everything. Small disciplines return control to your hands. They say, you don't need to win the whole day, you only need to win this moment. That mindset changes how you approach life. Everything. Instead of waiting for perfect timing, you begin to move with imperfect consistency. Instead of judging yourself for what you didn't do, you focus on what you did, no matter how small. Everything. And the brain rewards that. Each small completion releases a signal of success. It reinforces behavior. It lowers resistance the next time, over weeks and months. Everything. What once felt like effort becomes automatic. What once felt forced becomes normal. This is how habits stop being something you manage and start being something you live. Everything. There's also something deeply human about small disciplines. They respect your limits. They acknowledge that life is unpredictable. They don't demand perfection. They only ask for presence. Everything. On hard days, showing up small is still showing up. And those days matter more than easy ones. Easy days build confidence. Hard days build identity. This is where many people get stuck. Everything. They think progress only counts when it's impressive. But the brain doesn't measure impressiveness. It measures repetition. It measures consistency. Everything. It measures what you return to when no one is watching. Small disciplines work because they're sustainable. They don't collapse under stress. They don't disappear when life gets busy. Everything. They bend. They survive. And over time, they do something remarkable. They change how you see yourself. You stop asking, can I do this? You start saying, everything. This is just what I do. From effort to identity is the quiet transformation most people miss. It's not dramatic, it's not flashy, but it's permanent. Everything. You don't need a new personality to change your life. You need a few small disciplines repeated long enough to convince your brain that this is who you are now. Everything. And once the brain accepts that, behavior follows naturally. Small disciplines are powerful because they don't ask you to become someone else overnight. Everything. They allow you to become someone new gradually, without fear, without burnout, without pressure. They meet you exactly where you are. And then, step by step, everything. They take you somewhere completely different. Most people think discipline is something you switch on when motivation appears, like a tool you pick up when life demands more from you. Everything. They see it as effort, pressure, or force. Something you borrow for a while and then put down once the goal is reached. But that view quietly keeps discipline fragile. Everything. Because anything you only do can be skipped, postponed, or abandoned the moment it feels uncomfortable. Real discipline doesn't live in your schedule. It lives in your identity, everything. The shift that changes everything happens when discipline stops being an action you perform and becomes a reflection of who you are. Not who you want to be one day, everything, but who you are choosing to become through small, repeated behaviors that you honor daily. Think about someone you trust deeply, not because they make big promises, everything, but because they keep small ones. They show up when they say they will. They follow through even when no one is watching. Over time, you don't question their word, everything. You believe in it automatically. That same trust can exist between you and yourself, but only if you build it deliberately. Every time you follow through on a small discipline, everything, you cast a quiet vote for the person you believe yourself to be. And every time you break a promise to yourself, you weaken that identity just a little, everything. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they no longer trust themselves. This is why small disciplines matter so much. They are not about productivity, everything. They are about self-respect. Consider the person who wakes up and immediately checks their phone, even though they promised themselves they would start the day calmly. It seems insignificant, everything. But over time, that small act sends a message my impulses lead, not my intentions. Compare that to someone who wakes up and drinks a glass of water first every single day. Everything, no dramatic effort, no motivation required, just consistency. That person begins to see themselves differently. They are someone who keeps simple agreements, everything. Someone who starts the day on their own terms. Identity is built this way, quietly, repeatedly, and without ceremony. When discipline becomes part of who you are, everything, it stops feeling like punishment. You no longer ask, do I feel like doing this? You ask, what does someone like me do in this situation? And the answer becomes obvious, everything. Someone who sees themselves as disciplined doesn't debate whether to take action. They act because it aligns with their identity, just like a truthful person doesn't debate whether to lie, everything. Or a reliable person doesn't debate whether to show up. It's not about willpower. It's about alignment. This is where confidence is born, not from loud affirmations or forced positivity, everything, but from evidence. Confidence grows when your actions repeatedly confirm your values. When you do what you said you would do, especially in small moments, everything. You develop an inner authority that doesn't depend on external validation. Think about the quiet confidence of someone who knows they can rely on themselves, everything. They don't rush to explain their plans. They don't need approval. They move steadily, grounded in trust. That confidence is not inherited. It is earned through consistency, everything. The mistake many people make is trying to adopt the habits of disciplined people without adopting their identity. They copy routines, schedules, and systems, everything. But they don't address the deeper belief, I am someone who follows through. Without that belief, discipline always feels forced. The good news is that identity is not fixed. Everything. It is shaped through repetition. You don't become disciplined by deciding it once. You become disciplined by proving it to yourself over time through small, repeatable actions. Everything. And the smaller the action, the more powerful it becomes, because small disciplines are easier to keep, and consistency is what builds belief. Everything. Start by choosing disciplines so small they feel almost too easy. 5 minutes of reading, one written goal, a short walk, a single deep breath before reacting. These are not impressive acts, everything, but they are trustworthy ones, and trust compounds. There is a subtle but important difference between chasing results and reinforcing identity. When you chase results, you ask, everything. Did this work? When you reinforce identity, you ask, did I show up as the person I'm becoming? One focuses on outcomes. The other focuses on character, and character lasts, everything. You will notice something interesting as this identity takes root. You will feel less internal resistance, less self-negotiation, less mental friction, everything. Discipline will no longer feel like something you have to push yourself into. It will feel like a natural extension of who you are. This is where self-respect deepens, everything. Self-respect is not built through grand achievements. It is built when your private actions match your public intentions. When no one is watching and you still choose integrity, everything. When you keep going on ordinary days, when you honor the process, not just the outcome, and with self-respect comes calm, a quiet steadiness, everything. You stop seeking motivation because you no longer depend on emotion to move forward. You depend on identity. There will still be hard days. Discipline doesn't eliminate discomfort, everything, but it changes how you interpret it. Discomfort stops being a signal to quit and becomes a signal that you are acting in alignment with growth. You don't panic when motivation fades. Everything, because your identity remains intact. Think of discipline as a mirror. Every small action reflects something back to you. Over time, you begin to recognize the person staring back. Everything. Someone dependable, someone grounded, someone capable of progress even when circumstances are imperfect. This is not about becoming rigid or harsh with yourself. Everything. True discipline is flexible but consistent. It adapts without abandoning its core standards. It allows rest without losing direction. It is rooted in self-respect, not self-punishment. Everything. When you miss a day, and you will, the identity doesn't shatter. You simply return to the next small action, not with guilt, but with ownership, because disciplined people don't quit. Everything. They recalibrate. As this identity strengthens, you will notice that other areas of life begin to align naturally. Decision-making becomes clearer. Boundaries become easier to hold. Everything. Distractions lose their grip. Not because you are forcing control, but because your internal standards are stronger. You begin to trust yourself under pressure, and that trust is priceless. Everything. This is the long game of discipline, not chasing perfection, not grinding endlessly, but becoming someone who moves forward with consistency and self-respect. Everything. Someone whose actions match their values more often than not. Someone who doesn't rely on motivation to act with intention. Everything. Every small discipline you repeat today is shaping the person you wake up as tomorrow. And whether you realize it or not, you are always becoming someone through your daily choices. Everything. The question is not whether you are building an identity, but which one you are reinforcing right now. There will be days when motivation simply doesn't show up. No warning, no explanation. Everything. You wake up heavier than usual. The excitement that once pushed you forward feels distant, almost unfamiliar. And in those moments, many people quietly assume something is wrong with them. Everything. They believe they've lost discipline, lost ambition, lost their edge. But the truth is far simpler and far more human. Motivation was never meant to be permanent. Everything. It comes and goes like weather. The mistake is believing your progress should depend on how you feel. Think about how many important things in life you do without motivation. Everything. You don't wait to feel inspired to brush your teeth. You don't need a surge of excitement to lock your door, show up for work, or pay your bills. Everything. These actions happen because they are standards, not emotional decisions. And the moment personal growth becomes a standard instead of a feeling, everything changes. Everything. Consistency is not built on motivation. It's built on structure. It's built on systems so simple that even on your worst days they still function. When motivation fades, and it always will, everything, you either fall back to chaos or you fall back to a system. And the people who keep moving forward aren't stronger emotionally. They're just more prepared. Everything. Imagine someone who commits to waking up early to work on themselves. In the beginning, it feels powerful. There's excitement, energy, a sense of becoming someone new. Everything. But then a few weeks pass, sleep feels better, the alarm feels aggressive, motivation disappears. Most people interpret this moment as failure, but disciplined people interpret it as normal. Everything. They don't ask, do I feel like it today? They ask, what is the smallest version of this habit I can still honor? That question changes everything. Everything. Because consistency doesn't require intensity, it requires continuity. On low energy days, your only responsibility is to protect the chain, not to do your best. Not to exceed expectations. Everything. Just to show up in some form. 5 minutes instead of an hour. 1 page instead of a chapter. A slow walk instead of a full workout. The goal is not performance. Everything. The goal is identity maintenance. When motivation fades, simplicity becomes your greatest ally. Complex routines collapse under pressure. Everything. Overly ambitious plans break the moment life becomes inconvenient. But simple systems endure. A short checklist. A fixed time. A clear trigger. These remove decision-making from the equation. Everything. And every decision you eliminate protects your discipline. There's a reason successful people often appear calm rather than intense. They're not constantly fighting themselves. Everything. They've designed their lives to require less willpower. They understand that willpower is unreliable, but structure is loyal. Structure shows up even when emotions don't. Everything. Think about a time you stopped progressing, not because you quit entirely, but because you slowly drifted. You missed one day, then another. Then it felt awkward to return. Everything. That drift didn't happen because you lacked motivation. It happened because there was nothing anchoring you when motivation left. No fallback plan. No minimum standard. No rule that said, everything. Even on bad days, I still do this. Consistency is not about never missing a day. It's about never missing twice without intention. Everything. It's about recognizing that setbacks are part of the process, not a reason to abandon it. When you expect dips, they stop feeling like failure. They start feeling like checkpoints. Everything. There's a quiet confidence that develops when you stop negotiating with your emotions. When you say, I don't need to feel ready to act. I act everything, and readiness follows. This mindset removes drama from discipline. You stop making progress a reflection of your mood. You start making it a reflection of your values, everything. And values don't change daily. On difficult days, the question is not how to feel better, it's how to move forward gently. Pressure creates resistance. Gentleness creates sustainability. Everything. Some days, progress looks like doing less, but doing it anyway. And that still counts. In fact, it counts more because it's done without emotional reward. Everything. This is where many people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline is force. It's not. Discipline is agreement. An agreement you made with yourself when you were clear-minded. Everything. Not when you were tired or discouraged. And consistency is simply honoring that agreement over and over again, even imperfectly. Consider someone learning a new skill. At first, everything. They practice enthusiastically. Over time, practice feels repetitive, boring, unrewarding. This is where most people stop. But those who continue don't push harder. They lower the barrier. Everything. They shorten the session. They remove friction. They make it easier to start than to quit. And eventually, momentum returns, not because they chased it, everything, but because they stayed present long enough for it to come back on its own. Motivation is a reaction to progress, not the cause of it. When you move consistently, motivation often follows. Everything. But when you wait for motivation, progress stalls. This reversal is subtle, but it's the difference between people who plateau and people who evolve. You don't need to win every day, everything. You just need to remain engaged. Staying in the game matters more than how you perform in any single moment. Everything. The long arc of change bends in favor of those who refuse to disconnect completely. There will be seasons when everything feels heavy, when effort feels invisible, when growth feels slow. Everything. In those seasons, your job is not to accelerate, it's to stabilize, to protect your habits from collapse, to lower expectations without lowering standards. Everything. To remind yourself that showing up quietly still counts. And here's something rarely said, but deeply important: discipline becomes easier when you trust yourself. Everything. And you trust yourself by keeping small promises, not big dramatic ones. Every time you follow through on a tiny commitment, you reinforce the belief that you are dependable. Everything. That belief becomes emotional armor. It keeps you steady when motivation disappears. You are not meant to feel inspired all the time. Everything. You are meant to build something that works even when inspiration is gone. That is maturity. That is self-leadership. That is how progress becomes permanent. So when motivation fades, everything, and it will, don't panic, don't criticize, don't quit, simplify, reduce, continue, stay connected to the process in the smallest way possible. Everything. Because consistency isn't about how strong you feel. It's about how well you've designed your life to keep moving even when strength feels distant. And in those quiet moments, everything. When no one is watching and nothing feels exciting, something powerful is happening. You are becoming someone who moves forward regardless of mood. Everything. Someone who doesn't need emotional permission to grow. Someone whose progress is calm, steady, and inevitable. Everything. There is a moment in every meaningful transformation when something quietly clicks, not in a dramatic way, not with fireworks or sudden applause. Everything. But with a calm realization that you are no longer fighting yourself. You are moving with yourself. Everything. That is the moment when discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like momentum. At first, small daily disciplines feel almost insignificant. So small, in fact, everything, that your mind questions whether they matter at all. 5 minutes of focus, 1 page read, 1 healthy choice, 1 honest promise kept. Compared to the scale of the life you want, everything. These actions can feel laughably tiny. And yet, this is exactly how powerful change begins, so quietly that doubt doesn't even bother to argue. Think about how momentum works in real life. Everything. A train does not start at full speed. It moves slowly, inch by inch, until the weight of motion itself carries it forward. Once it's moving, everything. Stopping it takes far more force than starting it ever did. Human behavior works the same way. Discipline creates motion. Repetition creates speed. Identity creates direction. Everything. Many people wait for clarity before they act. They want to feel certain before they commit. But clarity is not something you find. It's something you earn through movement. Everything. When you repeat small disciplines daily, your mind begins to trust you. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking whether you feel like doing the work. Everything. You simply do what the version of you you're becoming would do. There's a story that plays out quietly in countless lives. Someone decides to wake up 15 minutes earlier each day. Everything, nothing heroic, no grand declaration, just a quiet alarm and a small promise. At first it's uncomfortable. Some mornings are easier than others. But over weeks, everything, that extra time becomes sacred. It's used for reflection planning or simply breathing before the noise of the day begins. Months later, that person isn't just waking up earlier. Everything. They're thinking more clearly, making better decisions, and responding to life instead of reacting to it. The habit didn't change their life overnight. It changed their direction. Everything. And direction, given enough time, changes everything. This is the compounding effect most people underestimate. They think compounding belongs only to money, numbers, and spreadsheets. Everything. But the most powerful form of compounding happens internally. Confidence compounds. Self-trust compounds. Discipline compounds. Each small win makes the next one easier. Everything. Not because the task changes, but because you do. At some point, discipline stops being about control and starts becoming about freedom. Freedom from indecision. Freedom from inconsistency. Everything. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of starting over. When your daily actions align with your values, your energy stops leaking. You know who you are. You know what you do. Everything. And that certainty becomes calming. There will still be hard days. Discipline does not eliminate difficulty. It gives you a way through it. On days when motivation disappears, everything, your systems remain. On days when confidence wavers, your habits carry you forward. This is why discipline becomes a lifelong ally. It doesn't depend on your mood. Everything. It doesn't argue with your emotions. It simply shows up quietly every day, waiting for you to do the same. Consider the people you admire most, not the loudest, but the most grounded. Everything. The ones who seem steady under pressure, the ones who don't panic when things go wrong. Rarely is their strength the result of talent alone. More often, everything. It's the result of standards repeated for years. They don't rise to the occasion. They fall back on their discipline. And because that discipline is familiar, everything, it feels effortless from the outside. This is what it means to become unstoppable, not in an aggressive sense, but in a grounded one. You are no longer easily thrown off course. Everything, setbacks still happen, but they no longer define you. Missed days don't become missed months. Mistakes don't turn into self-betrayal. You adjust, return, and continue. That ability, everything, to return without drama, is one of the highest forms of discipline. Small disciplines also sharpen your sense of direction. When your days are intentional, patterns emerge. Everything. You notice what energizes you and what drains you. You begin to refine your focus naturally without force. Opportunities align not because of luck, everything, but because your behavior signals readiness. You are prepared when chances appear, because preparation has become your default. And perhaps the most profound change happens internally. Everything. In how you speak to yourself, the inner dialogue shifts from criticism to cooperation. You stop asking, "Why can't I stay consistent?" and start saying, "Everything. This is just what I do now." That subtle change in language reflects a deeper change in identity. You are no longer trying to become disciplined. You are living as someone who is everything. This doesn't require perfection. In fact, perfection would destroy the process. Discipline thrives on flexibility, not rigidity. It allows room for rest, recovery, and recalibration. Everything. The goal is not to do everything, but to do the right small things consistently. When life gets heavy, discipline doesn't demand more, it simplifies. It protects what matters most. Everything. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't seek validation. It simply stands firm. Everything. That confidence becomes visible in your posture, your voice, your decisions. Others may call it discipline, but you'll know it as trust. Over time, everything. The results speak without needing explanation. Habits feel natural. Progress feels steady. The chaos that once felt normal now feels foreign. You haven't become a different person. Everything. You've become a more aligned one. Someone whose actions reflect their intentions. Someone whose days quietly support their future. And all of this, the clarity, the momentum, the strength, everything, was built through small disciplines repeated when they didn't seem to matter. That is the paradox. The smallest actions create the biggest shifts, not because they are powerful in isolation, everything, but because they are loyal, they show up, they stay, they compound. This is how becoming unstoppable actually happens, not through force, but through faith in the process. Everything. Faith that today's small effort is shaping tomorrow's strength. Faith that consistency, even when unseen, is never wasted. And once that faith is built, everything, it becomes nearly impossible to stop moving forward, because forward is simply who you are now.